So two core competencies, I call them superpowers, that I discovered in the medical realm, where I was working with surgeons and oncologists who were guiding patients through really tough decisions. So the first superpower is getting someone to tell you what they're thinking but not saying. And when you think about that, that's really definitional for advisors. If you're going to go below the surface, if you're not going to just be superficial, if you're going to get to the real agenda, you have to get people to tell you what they're thinking but not saying. And ideally, you want to get to that place fast. And then the second superpower is when you've surfaced what's really on the true agenda, the hidden agenda, can you quickly guide people to good decisions in areas where they're stuck? And if you do that, then you're showing your advisory superpowers and you're very quickly earning trust. And so that's what really great surgeons and oncologists do, and that's what really great advisors do. Discovery and decision making, these are not conversations. I'm generally opposed to conversations. This is going to sound offensive and counterintuitive. Conversations tend to be very verbal, and there's a real limit to what we can do verbally. So I think people are using the word conversation as a placeholder for something much more important, which is critical reflection. And critical reflection and problem solving is four things. It's thinking, talking, reading, and writing. And if you can activate all those channels every time you interact, that's why we're having a great time in this space, because we're activating so many of those channels. That's kind of an important thing to take away. And for example, a discovery conversation with a prospect or a client or center of influence, it's not a conversation, it should be an interview. You are an expert, experts interview people. Now, at some part of the interview, there's a whole, spectrum of how you conduct interviews. You may disclose and you may share and you may have observations and recommendations. But understanding that it's a structured or semi-structured interview and putting some structure on it so you're really analyzing what are you doing before, what are you doing during, and what are you doing after this interview. So there's a lot more to say, but that's kind of a very high level nugget around. And again, I come back to Russ's firm since he's here. When we've done that, we've gotten, by having so much more structure on the conversations and having documentation and audio recording them and giving copies of the recordings to the prospects and clients, we're turning what a conversation is, which is a synchronous verbal exchange that's constrained by the limits of working memory, and we're taking that and we're making it a much more asynchronous, distributed, longitudinal, problem-solving relationship. And that's what advisors need to do. We need to be problem solvers over the course of a relationship. So, yeah, I have more to say, but I'll constrain myself and look forward to other interactions. So the iceberg model leverages two theories. One is a theory of progressive disclosure, and the other is a theory of cognitive dissonance. So, and you were going to ask me about magic questions.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to answer this question too. Yeah.
Go for it.
Because you were saying, hey, aren't there magic questions or formulas that we can get to that stimulate people to tell us what they're thinking but not saying? And so my experience, the iceberg, as we all know, there's the tip of the iceberg, and then there's what's much bigger is what's underneath the iceberg. So what we're trying to get at is what's under the iceberg. And because I'm being a little contrarian today, I'm going to say don't start with why. That's the wrong place to start. That's a good place to start if you're like introspecting, but when you're talking to someone, jumping into trying to dive in below the surface to the bottom of the iceberg, it can actually put people on their defensive. Sometimes you get lucky and people are just willing to go there with you right away. But really the thing to do is to start at the tip of the iceberg. At the tip of the iceberg is where people are consciously aware of something and willing to share it with you. So those are two conditions where you want to get them talking about that stuff. And so typically what I do when I want to start an interview is I'll say, hey, look, I scheduled this interview a while back. I sent you an agenda. Remember I said you got to structure interviews before. And I asked you to do some reflection. And so now I'd like to understand, when you were getting ready for this interview, did you make any notes to yourself? And if you did, can you share them with me, read them to me? And what that does is it takes something that people have had time to bring into conscious awareness and that they're willing to share with you, and they share it with you. So they get this starts the process of progressive disclosure. And I'm starting with something that they're comfortable with, but it's also more meaningful than just small talk about the weather or sports. It's something where I actually gave them a little assignment, and it's relevant to whatever the topic is that we're set up to discuss. So if they say, oh, oops, I didn't do my homework, you know, I didn't write anything down, that's okay. What I'm doing when I start with that question is I'm telegraphing and modeling the importance of thinking, talking, reading, and writing. And I say, okay, that's all right. I'm going to be taking notes, and I'll write this down. So what was on your mind then as you thought forward to this interview? So I've anchored them in the interview. I've anchored them in the agenda. I know that they've been thinking about it. It's been on their mind as they drove here or came here or as we set up the phone call. And so now I'm asking, okay, you didn't write anything down. Just tell me what's at the tip of the iceberg. And then I say, all right, once you've told me what's at the tip of the iceberg, I ask anything else. And I just keep doing that, anything else, anything else, anything else, anything else, until they're what's called saturated. And they've told me everything that's at the tip of the iceberg. And I do not interrupt them during that whole process. I do not offer any observations, no recommendations, no opinions, nothing. Sit on your hands, keep your mouth shut, all right? And let people disclose. And what that does is people build this progressive disclosure, and they realize, normally when I tell people things, it's because I trust them. And then the theory of cognitive dissonance kicks in, and they realize they must trust you because they're talking to you. Do you understand how powerful that is? So now, and it's not like trust is not binary. You don't just jump into deep trust. But every drip of progressive disclosure is a drip of trust. So anyway, there's more to it because after you've gotten, this is called scribing, the tip of the iceberg. After you've done that for a bit, then you're going to do something called laddering, which is getting people to elaborate. And then you're going to bring in your magic questions. Then you get to bring in your checklist of clever questions that stimulate further disclosure. So I'm going to stop there, but the iceberg model is really simple. It took 15 years to develop something that simple, but it's essentially what you can run with in structuring this kind of interview.